Now that we've had more time to look over the Pittsburgh Steelers free agent moves at the end of last week, I wanted to go over more parts of how this plays into their draft plans here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to go over that, and we're also going to have our Mock Draft Monday episode. It's going to be a fun one. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And Steelers fans, like I said, at the end of last week was a quick flurry there that they got two more signings in Breiden Fohoko, the defensive lineman from the Chargers, and Keanu Neal, the safety from the Falcons. And we talked a little bit about that then, but I think we should talk a little bit more about how they fit in now that we've had more time to kind of digest it. It was kind of raw then. We'll say this, though. Bud Dupree's still not signed. Not too shocking because he was in for a physical, and apparently there were no contract numbers discussed, but we're going to see how that plays out, and maybe both sides are kind of waiting for another shoe to drop there. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think there's something that can be taken away from what the Steelers have done with this free agency period to set up for the NFL draft. And I've talked about how last week it means that they're probably going to be aggressive, whatever direction that is. I think they're going to be aggressive in being open to the idea of trading up or back, because either way, they want to be able to maximize the value of this draft class to try to bring in guys. But I think it also signals the kind of guys they're bringing in, because I think that what the Steelers are doing is they are covering a lot of their bases, and they're giving themselves a chance to find more. They've gotten glue guys that fit in certain positions, guys have gotten role players in free agency. Now they want to draft the guys who could also become role players, but also become X factors for them and become those playmakers. And I think it all fits in with how this team is built right now. They're bringing more veteran presences who are good locker room guys, who have been captains for their different position groups and been leaders on the field. We talked about that with Cole Holcomb, with Elandon Roberts. We know that with Patrick Peterson. And Breiden Fohoko may not be, an outright leader, and Keanu Neal might not be an outright leader. But I got our friends from the different Locked On shows that covered these guys over the past year. We had David Harrison of Locked On Bucks and David Drogemeyer for Locked On Chargers to give their perspectives. I want you to listen to how they talk about these guys. First, here's our friend David Harrison from Locked On Bucks talking about Keanu Neal and what he was for the Buccaneers. I think it's also interesting the perspective he gives on the role that he played and how it changed throughout the season. Here's David.
David Harrison here of the Locked On Bucks podcast. So when you talk about Keanu Neal, you have to talk about the role that he played with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as he joins the Pittsburgh Steelers. Coming into Tampa Bay, he was expected to be a depth piece, a backup safety behind your more traditional strong safety Mike Edwards on the Buccaneers roster. That's exactly the role that he served. However, injuries in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary last season forced Keanu Neal into maybe a bigger role than most people expected. And while he didn't necessarily blow the roof off of Raymond James Stadium or anything like that, he was a very steady, very solid, very aggressive presence on the field when he was there. And more thoroughly, more importantly, he was a very, very professional part of the locker room and part of the defense, even through some of the struggles that the team was going through. I think with Pittsburgh, what you're looking at is a team player, a contributor who's going to be more of a depth guy. Would not necessarily expect him to challenge for a starting role necessarily, but certainly a guy who could earn some playing time in certain packages, or if you have some struggles with injuries in the secondary, he's a guy that can come in and you're not going to feel like the world is falling in around you having him in your starting lineup. Play him in the box, play him as that traditional strong safety. Don't make him a linebacker like the Dallas Cowboys do. Keep him in a safety role, but let him be an aggressive box safety like he does well. It earned him a Pro Bowl trip early in his career, and that's where the Pittsburgh Steelers can find the best use out of Keanu Neal as he joins their roster. Great dude, great guy. Really wishing the best for him as he moves on to Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a Steelers kind of guy, you got one in Keanu Neal, and he can contribute if you need him to.
Thank you, David, for your insight from Locked On Bucks. Also, if you ever want any Bucks insight, he's the man. Go check out Locked On Bucks at any time. But you listen to the phrases and the terms that are being used there. Team player, guy that won't, the world won't be falling down around if he goes in there. Depth option for you. Those terms, I think Keanu Neal fits well. And because he's a guy where, the Buccaneers had to call on him to do some things, to play kind of different roles that he wasn't originally signed to do. And he had to kind of expand himself. And he was okay there, but not exactly. And that's why, but when you look at his numbers, that might lead to why his numbers weren't as great when he was with the Buccaneers last year. But again, the Steelers aren't going to be looking at him as a starter. Jerry Dulac from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette said as much. He's there to be a backup for DeMonte KZ and Minkah Fitzpatrick, which gives him a specific role of being that guy that could be thrown into the box. And like he said, don't make him a linebacker. Don't ask him to do extra things, but be the aggressive safety that comes down, is physical, but can also help in coverage against guys in the box. And again, as I said at the end of last week, you look at his numbers. He misses tackles more often than Terrell Edmunds. He's shorter and slower than Terrell Edmunds, but he's going to be a veteran presence that won't be asked to do all the things that Terrell Edmunds did. Terrell Edmunds wasn't just a box safety for the Steelers. He lined up everywhere. If the Steelers do put Keanu Neal in a specific role and they can avoid major injuries to their starting safeties, where maybe he has to make one or two starts for them throughout the year because of, injuries do happen, but as long as it's not for an extended period of time, that might allow Keanu Neal to be the kind of asset that fits in for the Steelers as a puzzle piece. Now, listen to David Drogemeyer from Locked On Chargers about how Breiden Fohoko fits in for the Steelers here.
Hey, what's up, Steeler fans? This is David Drogemeyer of the Locked On Chargers podcast, and you guys just picked up a Chargers fan favorite, Breiden Fohoko, going to the Steelers, and this is a guy that you're going to fall in love with very quickly. A very big personality, very friendly, very engaging with the fans. And then as far as what he does on the football field, he does a lot of the dirty work. He's a big, nasty defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman, a guy that's going to take on the double teams. He's going to be a force against the run. He doesn't bring a lot as a pass rusher. That's just not his game. He wasn't really asked to do that with the Chargers. He was really just asked to be a guy that was going to make a difference against the run, and he absolutely did that. I expect him to continue to do that with the Steelers. You guys got a quality football player, a guy that really had to work his way up and earn his opportunities, and I'm happy to see him get another opportunity with the Steelers.
So you hear, likable guy, quality football player, does the dirty work. Breiden Fohoko, I think a lot like Keanu Neal, is a guy who's going to fit a specific role, be a good football player that sticks to that role. And if the Steelers can afford to keep them there because they're not suffering major injuries, these guys can be good role players, and they're filling specific spots so that these aren't weaknesses on the roster. This, again, I think goes into Omar Khan's and Andy Weidl's and Mike Tomlin's, their collective plan to put this roster at ease so that when it's draft night, that the Steelers can go be aggressive and go get the players that can be the X factor type guys, especially with those first two picks, wherever they'll be. Maybe they trade up, maybe they trade down, but they want to get guys who they think can be those type of playmakers that can contribute more in the turnover department or in the big playmaking department on offense. They can also get, of course, an offensive lineman whose blocks can be leveled at the key point of attack for the running game to get open, and as well as protecting Kenny Pickett so he can be the big playmaker. Lots more to discuss here. I want to keep going over this point and how it relates to this draft class specifically and where the Steelers can attack here. We'll talk more about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I would love to talk to you guys about our great sponsor, because this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Of course, the mobile game that you can play right on your phone or mobile device, where you become the NFL GM, making the decisions, you're making the draft picks, you're signing the coaches, you're doing everything to lead your team to glory. You can download this game on your phone by going to the App Store, or you can go to ultimate-gm.com to download this game right away. I've been playing it. I actually started picking up it again. As I told you guys before, I went 25 seasons as a GM. I won 19 championships. Now I'm looking to beat that. I've already done, I think, 5 seasons, and I've won 4 titles. I'm looking to break that. And it's a really fun game. It's simple. You just go week to week. You can improve your facilities. You can do all the things you need to do to make your team better, make the draft picks, make the draft day trades, all the crazy things. Show how resourceful of a GM you can be and building your football dynasty with Ultimate Football GM. And Locked On Steelers listeners get a 100% free boost to all of their franchise stats by using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's LOCKEDON again, Locked On, all capital letters, all one word. Make sure that you use that in the game store and check it out today. And again, to download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com or just look it up in your app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Continuing our start here, before we do continue, I want to give a quick shout out. I had the incredible experience this weekend to visit a site in Pittsburgh called the Roberto Clemente Museum. And if you know, anyone that knows sports knows the name Roberto Clemente, but that's where I got this cool hoodie from. It's really dope. I suggest you check it out. It's a great tour. It's a great visit. They have a lot of open houses coming up. It's right on the edge of Lawrenceville, like heading to town. So go check out the Roberto Clemente Museum. My man Gary gave a great tour. Dwayne Reeder runs it. It's an amazing experience. If you know anyone that loves sports and loves sports history, this is the chance to check out the great one. Also, I love this patch that they got on this hoodie here, so do check that stuff out. It was a great time. Especially if you're just a Pittsburgh fan, it's amazing to experience all the culture that goes through that. So go check out the Clemente Museum, by the way. But anyways, let's get back to the Steelers talk here, because I think that this goes into where I was talking about going for the playmakers, the guys who can be X factors on the field, because sometimes X factors don't necessarily need to be, a turnover creator or the touchdown scorer. Marquise Pouncey and David Castro were X factors for the Steelers. Why? Because they would throw so many key blocks at key points in games, one, to protect the Ben Roethlisberger over the years, but also to open up the holes for Le'Veon Bell, or James Conner, or whoever they were blocking for at the time. D'Angelo Williams also ran into that. But you look at guys, you want guys who can be those type of players that can take over key points in games and win you big time matchups against the other team's better opponents and better players. And I think that this is where the Steelers can afford to be aggressive. They don't have to necessarily trade if they see things falling the way they want. And we'll get to Mock Draft Monday in the third segment here on the show a little bit later. But there's a very real possibility that if they see a guy, whether it's a cornerback, an offensive tackle, a wide receiver, a defensive lineman. I think if there's any of those types of guys sitting there, they're like, man, we can't pass. This guy is going to change things for us. He's going to be the next big playmaker on the roster. They need to make sure that's the guy that they're adding to their roster in that way. And they want to add playmakers who can come in. And you're listening to how Keanu Neal's being talked about, how Breiden Fohoko is being talked about, how we talked about Patrick Peterson, Cole Holcomb, and Elandon Roberts. A lot of these guys, they're fitting into these roles. Some of these guys have bbeen leaders in other places. I think it's setting up the environment where the Steelers want to bring in not just young playmakers, but young playmakers who they can mold into their leaders for the future. I've talked about this before, and how I think a big part of them drafting Najee Harris and Kenny Pickett as back-to-back first-round picks, you look at how those guys were leaders for their team. Najee Harris was a presence for Alabama. Kenny Pickett was the presence for Pitt, and the leadership qualities that they bring to the Steelers locker room. And not that the Steelers don't have leaders already. They got Cam Hayward. He's been that guy. TJ Watt, he's been the guy. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick is about to be that guy. He's been younger, and I think he believes in deference and honoring, the older guys ahead of him. But I think once Joe Hayden was gone from the team, he was ready to be like, all right, it's my secondary room. I'm here to take it over. I think you're going to see that. And I think they want to see more guys like that on the roster and developing naturally through the system. And I think this is why they can be aggressive to go after, say they want to trade up and they want to get Christian Gonzalez or want to get a Devon Witherspoon, because they think those guys, either one of those guys, could be the game changer at cornerback. But again, if they want to trade up and get Broderick Jones or Peter Skoronski or Paris Johnson Jr., if one of those guys can be the guys that are making the key block downfield, that are sealing the edge and are opening up the big running lanes, this again puts the Steelers at an advantage to have another X factor play on the field, because they already have some, like we said, Cam Hayward, X factor, TJ Watt, X factor, Minkah Fitzpatrick, X factor. I think that guys that have the chance to get there soon could be a Najee Harris, could be a George Pickens. I think there's guys like that there. Pat Freiermuth has shown flashes of that. I think Deontay Johnson, if he can get on the same page as Kenny Pickett, could work his way to being that for the Steelers. And of course, Kenny Pickett himself. But they need more guys who can do that. You can't have a team full of X factor guys, like guys that are the game-changing point of the team, but you can have guys who balance that with them well. who fit in as puzzle pieces well. And I think that's what the Steelers have been doing. They've been finding the puzzle pieces so that now you have that construct. You have the basic premise of what the Steelers roster is supposed to do. Like last year, stop the run, get after the quarterback. If the quarterback makes a mistake, have guys in the secondary that are ready to be aggressive and take advantage of it to create the turnover. On offense, run the ball efficiently. Then play action, catch them off guard. Now, the passing game wasn't there last year. Well, there's no secrets about that. But Kenny Pickett's going to have a second year to work things through. He's going to have more time. I think he's going to have a really good opportunity to grow with this team. We've seen him working in the offseason with his receiving core, building that chemistry, building his own footwork, and focusing on his fundamentals. All those things lead to positive roads for the Steelers, in my opinion. And again, I'm going in this draft class. I don't think this team needs to necessarily settle for a guy who has a high floor and a high floor and a low ceiling. This is their chance to get guys with, make sure that these guys aren't, potential busts with, extremely low floors, but that they have high ceilings. Get the guy that you think can be the X factor. You don't just make the safe pick and getting the guy that you think he's going to be a solid player for the next 4 or 5 years. And then, maybe you sign him to a decent contract after that. Go get the guy that you think could be the next gem for you in your franchise. And the question is that we are going to continue asking ourselves for the next 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. We have over 3 weeks. So it's the 27th, but less than a month. That over this next month here, we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be debating, who are those guys? Is it, Joey Porter Jr.? Is it Broderick Jones? Is it Lucas Van Ness? Is it, Nolan Smith? Is it Jordan Addison? We're it's going to take time to find out, but that's what we're here to talk about. We'll get more into debates about different prospects soon. I want to build our final big boards and things like that. Now that free agency is mostly done, I still expect the Steelers to sign someone else. Back on the Bud Dupree thing, I think they either sign him, or if the physical doesn't work out, they sign someone else. But point being, I think they put themselves in a position where they are not stuck to one situation. They're not stuck to one position. I think that they kind of had to draft Najee Harris the other 2 years ago because they needed a running back. And I know that some people were like, well, they didn't need to draft him there. Okay, sure. But they did need a playmaker running back for the long term, even just beyond that year. I think they needed a veteran running back in these upcoming years to kind of carry it for when they knew they were going to have to draft a rookie quarterback. And I think that the way that they've done it now, they have Najee Harris entering his third year. He'll have experience. This was around the time of his career when Derrick Henry started busting out and become a big playmaker that, everyone calls him King Henry. I'm not saying Najee Harris is going to become Derrick Henry, but I'm saying that this is around the time where I think that he's going to start putting it together a little bit more. And now that he has an offensive line that most likely will be more invested into, they already have been more invested into, with Isaac Samalo being added to the offensive line. Also another really good role player and potentially even an X factor, the way that he run blocks. Point being, I think that that Najee Harris is getting his way to that position. And again, if the run game is there and you're starting to see that, it only makes life easier for this pass game to open up and easier for Kenny Pickett to become one of those X factor guys who becomes the game changer. So the question is just going to be, can you find guys with those high ceiling possibilities where, hey, even this year, they might not be the superstar player, but in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, when you start to unlock their possibilities, they're going to be the players that are being the game changers, and the guys who Steelers fans are starting to buy all the big jerseys for, because they want it. Steelers fans are like, hey, that guy is the future of the franchise. I think George Pickens has the potential to be that. I think other guys have the potential to be that. But now I think this is where Andy Weidel and Omar Khan get a chance to be really creative with how they find those guys and where they have those guys. It's going to be very intriguing to see what their big board is and how they use it to go get guys. Because again, I feel like if you're in a situation, and let's take a second and look at, just look at how the board ahead of them, 16 picks ahead of them. 4 picks are most likely going to be quarterbacks with Bryce Young, Will Levis, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson. So now you're talking about 12 more picks that you need to account for. Well, you can account for some of the bigger defensive names out there: Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson. So now you're talking about 7 guys off the board. So now you need 9 picks ahead of the Steelers. Let's just say that Christian Gonzalez and Devon Witherspoon. So now you're talking about 11 picks off the board. So, again, you put yourself in a position where, 9 picks off the board. I'm counting ahead of myself, but now you're putting yourself in a position where, there's only so many players that can be selected before you. And again, let's say all 3 of the top offensive tackles go, you get even closer. And now it's the question of what next group is going to be picked on. Is our wide receivers just skipped over? Are, tight ends just skipped over? Do they dip further and quicker into the cornerback class? There's a lot of different ways that this draft can go, and I think the Steelers, what they're going to probably do is they're probably going to be in a position where draft day, if they say, hey, we have these few targets and these position groups start to go, and they're like, you know what, we only got 1 or 2 more guys in the cornerbacks that we feel comfortable taking at 17. Let's be aggressive and go get one of those guys. And I'm going to have something to say about one of those guys in a little bit in this mock draft Monday, because I really like this pick and the way that this worked out for the person who built their mock draft for what the Steelers have done so far. But I think this is the chance for them to say, like, you know what, if this group starts to run, we have a certain couple guys that we want to get at 17. And if those guys start to go, we should trade up, get our guys. And again, with a trade up, you can give up the first round pick at 17 and the second round pick at 49, keep the 32nd overall pick, move up somewhere, between 10 and 14, get that guy that you really want. And then you can keep that 32nd overall pick, either use it if you want to just use that as the top second round pick of the draft, or trade it back and get an extra pick, day 2 pick, trade back in the second round and then recoup another third round pick. And then you still have 3 day 2 picks that you haven't wasted simply because you traded up. So lots of really good options, again, to be aggressive here. But let's start talking about players as we get to this Mock Draft Monday selection and who won it right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get to Mock Draft Monday and who won this week. Congratulations to everyone who's won so far. And just want to shout out everyone that participates, whether it's on Twitter or the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. You can follow me on Twitter at Carter Critiques. But yeah, shout out to everyone who participates, because it's a lot to pick from. You guys give me a lot of different ones. I almost picked 3 different winners at one point, and I had to settle on one. But the reason I settled on one, because I think it creates some interesting conversation here that I think could be very important to what the Steelers' actual draft plans are. So without further ado, our winner this week is Randy Lee Phillips. Congratulations, Randy, for all your picks. You did a great job assembling everything here, Randy. Let's go over what you did. First of all, Randy traded back from 17 to 19 with the Buccaneers, picking up the 82nd overall pick. Now, as we know, draft tech trade chart, I will say, moving forward, like this draft, according to the draft chart, this would have needed about maybe 100 more points in the draft tech trade chart, which assigns point values to each pick to kind of find a way to balance how trades should work on NFL draft day. So I'll let you get away with this one, Randy, but moving forward, if you guys want to include trades, they're going to need to fit that model at least close, like within 10, 20 points or so. Doesn't have to be dead exactly, but I do think the Buccaneers would have asked for more or given up less in this trade. But I wanted to go over it because for the way that Randy attacked this draft. First, trading back to 19 overall, you still got Joey Porter Jr. I'm a little suspect that Joey Porter Jr. stays until 19. I think that he's a really good player. I think that there's going to be certain teams looking at him. Now, it's funny. I was talking with our friend Kevin Ostreicher. He runs the Locked On Ravens podcast, and he was asking me, like, are they really going to take Joey Porter Jr. right before we pick? And I'm like, man, they might. And I think that's the thing. There's other teams that want him too. I think Washington is another team that picks at 16 right before the Steelers naturally pick at 17 that could take them. But let's say for this simulation that they do get Joey Porter Jr. The biggest drawback that has been made about Joey Porter Jr. is his lack of interceptions. And the Steelers love guys right now that gets turnovers. And certainly, sure, that could be a thing that you look at. He's only had 1 interception in his 4 years of playing college football at Penn State. That could be alarming, but he does have 9 breakups last year, 3 breakups the year before that. So 12 breakups in the last 2 years. But I'll say this about Joey Porter Jr. too. The guy stays in position. The guy attacks the ball, I think, well enough. If you look at his numbers and you ask why didn't he get more interceptions, it's because he wasn't thrown at that much. This past year in 2022, he was targeted 30 times. Allowed 15 catches, by the way, so it was 50% the time he was giving up a reception. The NFL passer rating that went his way, he never gave up a touchdown this past season. NFL passer rating was 63.6 when they went it. Compare it to Deonte Banks, who I think right now a lot of people have come kind of competing with Joey Porter Jr. as that third cornerback that could be off the board. Deonte Banks was targeted 60 times. Now he gave up a lower percentage and with 26 allowed receptions. That's 43% allowed on the receptions, but he also allowed 4 touchdowns and only got 1 interception. Still a good pass rating that he allowed, only 71.4 NFL pass rating when quarterbacks targeted his way. But still, point being, I think Joey Porter Jr., a big reason why he doesn't have more balls thrown his way is because he's constantly in position. And I think that if you look at his tape enough, you can see a guy that if more balls were thrown his way, maybe he would make better plays in the football. Maybe he would have higher interceptions, but I wouldn't use that as a reason to discount him as a Steelers first-round pick necessarily. Plus, especially, they love them some Joey Porter Jr. Mike Tomlin fawns over him because he watched that kid grow up because, Joey Porter was Joey Porter for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he coached under Mike Tomlin. They used to go to his high school games and everything. So, absolutely. I think that Joey Porter Jr. is still definitely on the Steelers' radar and will be a potential pick. And if they can get him at 19 and get an extra third-round pick for it, that would be amazing value for them. Then at 32, when you get to the second round, you have them keeping the 32nd overall pick here, Randy, and getting Devon Jones from Ohio State. Now, Devon Jones, I think, has some work to do. I think, he has his extremely huge frame and long arms is great, and it'll be an awesome tool. But I do think that he needs to still become more consistent. I think it's going to be interesting to see where the Steelers try to fit him. Do they put him at right tackle? Do they put him at left tackle? Do they let him who they make him battle up against, whether it's Chuks Okorafor or Dan Moore Jr. But either way, I think he has a solid presence to the offensive tackle room. Then this was another pick that I thought really enticed me with this conversation. It was Cedric Tillman, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. Randy picked him at 49 overall. Cedric Tillman is, I think, an interesting prospect of a wide receiver here, because when I look at Cedric Tillman and the way that he's built, he's a bigger bodied wide receiver. He's going to be the kind of guy that you want him more to line up on the outside, but I'd be interested to see how would he fit in the slot. He's 6'3", 213, wins a lot of jump balls, a lot of contested catches, only has a 4.54 a 40-yard dash, but man, that's enticing as a big slot option. And lo and behold, the Steelers didn't bring him in over the weekend, but they are scheduled to bring in Jonathan Mingo, the Ole Miss wide receiver, who stands at 6'2", 220, runs a bit faster at a 4.46, but is another big slot potential type of guy. And I think guys like that could be an interesting fit for the Steelers wide receiver group. Now, it should also be noted the Steelers also brought in another wide receiver in Charlie Jones. Charlie Jones, of course, the receiver out of, why am I blanking on where he's from? Purdue. That's right. Big Ten school. But he's a smaller receiver, 5'11", ran a good 40 at a 4.43. He's a little bit faster. He's more of like a traditional speed guy. Put him in the slot, watch him make big plays. But again, how he fit. I think what's interesting about the fit here with a Tillman or a Mingo is that the Steelers don't have that thick wide receiver anymore like they did with Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool, guys who could just go up, win jump balls, be physical, kind of help as an extra blocking wide receiver over the middle. I think all of those things right there could be absolutely on the mark for the Steelers, and that's why Cedric Tillman is enticing here as the 49th overall pick. Might be rich for a lot of people. Some people see him more as a third-round pick. In that option there, but still, I've seen him be a playmaker at Tennessee. I think he'd be a very interesting pickup there. Moving forward, getting Tucker Kraft kind of, I think, in that tier after the top 5 tight ends there, but an 80th overall tight end out of South Dakota State. That'd be at least your third string tight end there. He'd have time to develop with Frymuth and Gentry already being comfortable there. And if you're wondering about Connor Hayward, that just allows him to play more H-back and kind of float around the offense a little bit more. I think this is totally fine there. Then at 82, with the pick that was traded for, that gotten from the Buccaneers trade, Randy got Sidney Brown, safety out of Illinois. I like Sidney Brown. Think that'd be an interesting depth piece there for the Steelers and give them a youth safety who, if after a year or two, Monte KZ, Keanu Neal weren't working out, he'd be an interesting fit into a secondary with Minkah Fitzpatrick. And there's no rush to play him because you got all those veterans. And finally, at 120, Zach Pickens, defensive tackle out of South Carolina, and the 2 off-ball linebackers in the 7th round with Afrani Orji from Vanderbilt and Charlie Thomas from Georgia Tech. That being said, all those picks there, I think, line up with needs the Steelers have. You take a shot at defensive tackle with Zach Pickens. I do think the Steelers would like to get their defensive tackle, for the future. They would want to get their big defensive lineman this year who can take the spot of a Cam Hayward in the near future. I just don't know if that's going to happen with the way the boards are lining up right now with a guy that they think can be the long-term answer here. And who knows, maybe it will. But just the way things are breaking out, if I go and I look at interior defenders, I have a hard time looking at this and saying, like, Kalijah Kancey. I love Kalijah Kancey. I think that the Steelers should, if they could, they should have found a way to fit him into their defense. I think that his size at 6'1", 281, I think that he's going to be a problem in the NFL, but they want big, long-armed defensive linemen. That's where and I think that's just their scheme fit, and that's why Kalijah Kancey won't work there. I think Brian Brzee is interesting out of Clemson, but I think that they might value other playmakers here. Now, I do think a perfect fit here would have been Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin. He's talked about liking the Steelers. I get the feeling that they really like him. He'll be 22, I think, when the season starts. Man, I like the idea of getting him. I think he's big, he's physically strong, he plays with good technique. I think he'd be a great second-round addition. That'd be my one switch up from Randy's pick there, that I'd throw him in that mix there because I think he would be an answer there, especially even long-term for the Steelers to pair with DeMarvin Leal for the future. But that being said, I think that defensive tackle or the interior defensive lineman is a spot where the Steelers can wait on getting the star at that position and get, a really good player with decent upside who can be a role player for the next few years. But again, going over Randy picks, love Joey Porter Jr. at 19. I think that if you can make that work, you get a cornerback who's a playmaker, and he can become a playmaker on the ball. I know his numbers don't suggest that, but again, I think that that's just because he wasn't targeted a whole lot this year. We'll see how that moves playing forward. Dewan Jones, can he develop into that guy? Cedric Tillman can be a playmaker wide receiver. I think there's a lot of options there that fit where I think the Steelers are going. So congratulations to Randy again for winning the Mock Draft Monday. We hope that everyone keeps playing. We only got a few more of these left because the NFL draft is coming up in just a few weeks. But we'll have more to talk about this week on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks again for joining me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. And remember, if you want to help out the show, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a shout out at the end of the show. Thanks again, everybody. I'll be back Tuesday with more talk on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.